Thank you for joining us for Challenging Anti-Semitism and Maintaining Community with Emilia. I'm going to say Diamant.
Beautiful the way you say it. We'll keep it. We'll keep it.
All right. And then just to go over our usual engagement norms, please just be respectful, as of course you would be. And we just wanted to give a quick thank you shout out to our partners. All right. Please take it away, Emilia.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see some of you and some of your faces, some of your ceilings. Mom, your ceiling. You know, parents are here. Totally understand it's been a long day. Slash, my mother just gave me the finger. That's recorded, Anita.
Saw it.
Um, I'm really excited to be here. Which is a funny thing to say on this topic, but it's still true. Hopefully this can be a pretty interactive section, an opportunity for us. Oh, Maria, Isabel, hi, good to see you. It's good to see my friend Brian again. Like, hi, Josh. Hopefully, again, this can be an opportunity for us to talk and have a conversation. I want to just start by saying that, I put this session in a couple weeks ago, and we've just in the last 18 hours seen another act of anti-Semitic violence in this country, in Boulder, Colorado. Um, and We're clearly Jews that use uh, technology on Shavuot, but there are some Jews that don't, and there are some people that will be finding out about what happened in Boulder as they tune back in over the coming hours. And so I just want us to all remember and be gentle with ourselves as we have this conversation now and always. That we're dealing with a lot of these dynamics in real time. And also I'm reminding myself to be gentle with myself as I'm navigating late night and into early morning and into all of these. I'm sure many of you have been learning for many hours, but I'm excited to be here with you. So again, my name is Emilia Diamant. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Chief Program Officer at Avodah. Avodah is excited to be co-sponsoring this event for the first time. Avodah is a national organization that works to train Jewish social justice leaders to bring social justice and Judaism into a living relationship with one another. And today what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about this moment in the as Grace Lee Boggs says, in the time of the clock rolled. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to challenge anti-Semitism and maintain community. Because sometimes it can feel challenging. I don't know about for you, but for me as well, to be really in the thick of the work of social justice and Tikkun Olam, and challenge anti-Semitism as we see it. Before we continue, I'm going to do what a lot of social justice types do and invite you to do whatever you need to do to sort of like take a deep breath, put your feet on the ground, ground yourself in whatever way you need to. Take a deep breath in through your nose and exhale. And just sort of like allow yourself to be present and also just like take care of yourself as you need to as we go through this. One thing that we know is hotly contested in the Jewish community is defining anti-Semitism. As is not, shouldn't be surprising to us. We can't even agree on a definition. But what we're going to do is have a really basic working definition just because we have 55 minutes together. So we can't, I don't want to spend the whole time here today defining anti-Semitism. This is a definition from the Nexus Project, which if you're not familiar with the Nexus Project, highly recommend you look them up online. They're kind of a think tank made up of scholars and other thinkers from across the country who are really working to sort of get a clear definition and clear messaging out about what anti-Semitism is. And I would love if someone would come off mute, just anybody, and read this definition for us.
Anti-Semitism consists of anti-Jewish beliefs, attitudes, actions, or systemic conditions. It includes negative beliefs and feelings about Jews, hostile behavior directed against Jews because they are Jews, and conditions that discriminate against Jews and significantly impede their ability to participate as equals in political, religious, cultural, economic, and social life.
Fairly baseline, like we're not going to go further into detail, but this is what we're going to use for right now. Thank you, Rabbi Brian. And then I wanted to add one nugget from a non-Jewish ally here, who is Eric Ward. I don't know if folks have ever read Eric Ward's piece, Skin in the Game. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. Eric Ward works with Western States Center. He works with Race Forward. He is Black and not Jewish. And he says anti-Semitism is whatever a society will allow it to be. Before we dive further, I also want to talk for a second about white supremacy culture. Because for me, when we're talking about anti-Semitism, we also have to talk about white supremacy culture. And we'll talk about why in a minute. Can someone read what the definition of white supremacy culture is for us?
White supremacy culture is the widespread ideology baked into the beliefs, values, norms, and standards of our groups, many, if not most of them. Our communities, our towns, our states, our nation, teaching us both overtly and covertly that whiteness holds value, whiteness is value.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Okay. So adding a little bit more dimension on here, right? We have anti-Semitism, which is a distinct, if we go back, it's a distinct set of beliefs, attitudes, axioms, or systemic conditions, negatives, beliefs, and feelings, hatred towards Jews. And then we have white supremacy culture, right? These exist distinctly, but they're connected, and we're going to get there in a second. White supremacy culture was really brought to the fore by Tema Okun and Kenneth Jones in the 90s. And something else that they say about white supremacy culture is that we're all swimming in the waters of white supremacy culture. We're all navigating it regardless of our racial identity. We're not all affected in the same ways. Some of us are encouraged to join and collude without awareness that an invitation has been extended. Some of us are invited to participate at the cost of separating ourselves from our communities and families. Some are shamed because we can never fully join, no matter how hard we try. Some are denied any invitation in order to be targeted or exploited or violated. So, any supposition as to why I might be, oh, I went away too fast, sorry. Why I'm putting these right next to each other. You can put it in the chat or you can just come off mute.
Emilia,
Yeah.
I wonder if it's I mean I often share about I feel like we as Jews are sit in this weird place in the Venn diagram where we are simultaneously beneficiaries and targets of white supremacy. That's kind
Yep.
of how I think about it.
Yep. That's
Well,
definitely a big part of it.
well, some of us are Jews of color,
There we go. Thank you.
like
Amen.
me.
Amen. Thank you.
So I think that probably applies to some Jews, but not all, that some
Yep.
of them benefit from white supremacy and others don't.
Thank you.
And there's also like the idea of conditional whiteness,
Yep.
which applies to like Ashkenazi Jews. And it also applies to people who were not considered white in the past, like Irish and Italian people, but now they are. But at the past, like Italians and Irish people may as well. They were treated the way Mexicans are now.
Right. Sorry, I can't see who's speaking. Okay, Finn, was that you? Sorry.
Yep, that was me.
Sorry, I'm sharing screen so I can't see. Thank you, Finn. Yes. So a couple things come to the fore here, right? We have the dimensionality of the racial identities of Jews are varied, right? So we have that complexity that's important and is named here. We have the complexity of the conditional whiteness of white Ashkenazi Jews, or like I am, there are Jews who are Sephardi and Mizrahi who present as white, right? And there are Jews who are white, Dafka, who are like white white, and for whom in this country we have become white. If you've never read the book, How Jews Became White and What That Says About Race in America by Karen Brodkin. Someone's already doing good work in the chat for links with me, so I appreciate you. By Karen Brodkin. I highly recommend it. It does a really good job of telling that story of a very specific set of American Jewish history. But I think what's important, what I want to highlight here is we're talking about anti-Semitism in particular. Some are invited to participate in white supremacy at the cost of separating ourselves from our communities. So just hold that nugget in the back of your head as we continue to move forward. That's all I want you to do right now. Okay? Great. So, like, how is this all related and why am I talking about this before we get into it, right? White supremacy is all the institutions and ideologies that were set up in Europe and continued in this country to benefit white people on the backs of Black and Brown and Indigenous people, right? It was set up 400 years ago by European Christianity to justify colonization, genocide, and enslavement, particularly of Africans, and then the genocide of Native Americans. In addition to actually indentured servitude and enslavement of poor whites, and then, the bifurcation of immigrants in this country. It's also then maintained to sort of keep state power in the hands of effectively of white landowning Christians. That's sort of like how it was built and then how it was maintained, is to sort of keep the power right there and just keep it there. We don't want it to get lost. We don't want it to get reshuffled. So let's keep it there. And all oppressions continue to keep power in the hands of those who hold it. Each oppression tells a story about the people that dehumanizes it, and it sets them up for targeting or exploitation. Anti-Semitism tells a unique story that Jews are the ones really in power, right? The Jews are the ones that are plotting the system that has caused suffering, particularly the economic suffering of people in whatever country. It's funny because they can't quite pick which economic system we're behind. Is it communism or is it capitalism? They sort of pick depending on the day and which thing is particularly challenging at the moment, which is funny because those two seem to be at diametric odds with each other. But, and are they sitting in a room like people, I teach this to teens. They're like, well, is someone sitting in a room like planning this? Not right now, but if you've ever heard of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, there was a book written in Tsarist Russia that said that there was a room of Jews planning this, basically. And it is the source text for a lot of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that feeds this scapegoating. And so the scapegoating, and then remember that piece I said a minute ago about the white supremacy culture and the way that it's kind of should be in the back of our minds, reminding us that it is part of white supremacy culture attempts to remove us from one another and keep us from our communities. Let's keep those two things in mind as we continue forward. So, how many of you have ever heard anti-Semitism called a virus? Or the water we swim in, or waves, or whatever? Okay. There is a newer metaphor that I want to introduce called the machine of anti-Semitism. And this is one that's being used more frequently now. Can anyone guess why we're using machine as a metaphor versus viral or water? Have an idea. Ken, please.
Just a thought, Emilia, that came to me is that in our computer and cybernetic culture now, a machine is a symbol of mechanization and impersonality. So does that jive with the notion of an anti-Semitic machine?
It could, yeah. More modern, contemporary example, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Why else a machine versus a virus?
Amelia, in case you can't see the chat, Sharon posted something in the chat.
Thank you. Let me read it. Ooh, I can't see the chat. Intentionality, it's crafted by humans to serve a purpose, not a national phenomenon. Thank you, Sharon. Ding, ding, ding. You win the prize of a virtual cookie. Right? So so a machine is built by human beings and it is controlled by human beings and used to build a specific purpose. A virus or a water are a flaw. We see them as a flawed analysis of anti-Semitism that's part of nature and therefore that will always exist. Water, God willing, will always exist. Viruses are part of nature and will always exist. Those were not created by humans and cannot ever truly be stopped by humans. It means it's indiscriminate, it's equally present, and equally damaging no matter its source or political moments. Right? A machine means it was built by people and it's used by people for a specific purpose. And those people are the ones who most benefit from this use. Right? It also means anyone can fuel anti-Semitism intentionally or unintentionally. But what it also means is what? We can shut it down and dismantle it. And anti-Semitism is part of a larger whole, directly connected to other problems. And addressing it is intrinsically connected to other struggles. It's part of a lot of other machines, right? And we can break down all of these machines as part of a process. Yeah. Yes, Shmuel.
I hear what you are saying, but I think there is some difference in anti-Semitism.
Okay.
It's addictive. It is, and when you get it, you cannot simply switch it off.
No, definitely not. It's not like an easy off-on switch.
Anti-Semitism and any hate. Hate is such a powerful, energetic feeling that people are being enslaved by it. They hate because they hate. And you see the students in the college today, which are shouting free Palestine or things like this. They don't know what they are doing, but the hate burns some circuits in their head that they are sure and absolute sure that they are right. And it takes
Right.
years. I don't know what to cure such a thing.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that the machine is just turned off and on. What I'm saying is that the machine takes a while. It's dismantled. Like I'm not saying that there's an on and off switch. This machine makes it looks like there's a lever, but I don't think any machine that we use in a factory that creates something as complex as it's not a perfect metaphor. We could tease the metaphor out a little bit further, but we're not going to spend too much time. But I think to your point, right, like it's not as easy as an off and on switch. It's a much longer process to dismantle, but we want to avoid a metaphor where it's naturally occurring because then it means we can't intervene. But if we use a machine metaphor, it means we can intervene and we can dismantle it. If we get this idea that all these forms of hate we cannot possibly intervene, then it's hopeless and we'll never get there. Okay. Couple more slides and then I want to get into a little bit more discussion. So how does this machine work? Like we said before, anti-Semitism was largely created to protect people in power by shifting blame for society's problems to Jews, especially during moments of social change or unrest. And anti-Semitism can show up in any space, regardless of political ideology, because it's built into our society. Just like white supremacy, misogyny, transphobia, right? We can go along with the list, right? It is both unique and distinct, and it is also stands alongside and parallel all forms of other hate and marginalization. So we want to kind of move away from these old narratives around anti-Semitism is my argument. We're just going to try this on for the next, 40 minutes, and then you can never think about this again. If you don't like it, great. That's totally fine. We're going to try it on here. We are trying to move away from anti-Semitism as a timeless and static force that has always existed and will always exist in perpetuity. We also want to move away from this, like, anyone could be a source of anti-Semitism. So there's this mistrust, especially of non-Jewish people, that is warranted and actually necessary because it gives us a really intense sense of paranoia. To say that anti-Semitism is unique and different from other and disconnected from all other forms of oppression. Therefore, it has to be addressed in isolation. Right? I'm saying today, and you can disagree with me, that's fine, and we can have a separate one-on-one about that. Right? Like, I'm going to try to leave that behind. What we're trying to move towards is anti-Semitism is a form of systemic oppression with a specific function. Usually, not always, but usually to deflect blame for hardships, to discredit leaders or institutions, or to create this enemy from within. It is often accompanied by conspiracy theory and generates fear and division. And like I said before, it's distinct but connected to other forms of identity-based oppression, and it's present in all sectors of American society. It harms Jewish people and it harms everybody, not just Jews. The same way racism doesn't just harm people of color, it harms everybody. The same way misogyny doesn't just harm people who are female, it harms everybody, right? And we can and must dismantle it as part of our struggle for collective liberation. Okay. Whoo, more deep breaths. Questions about anything that I just threw at you right there? I just threw a lot of, like, ideas, thoughts, and things at you right there. Eliza, am I saying that right? Eliza?
Yes. So I will say it's a little hard to hear some aspects of where the trying to move some of the, I wouldn't say moving goalposts, but I think trying to shift the focus away can be hard to hear, at least at this specific time,
Yeah,
with the recent context of everything. But I think
yeah,
there's one thing that I think one context I think that's important for the virus analysis of anti-Semitism that I think is one of the reasons why that analogy exists is because throughout history, the hatred of the Jewish people, it seems to mutate in different ways, right? Like in the Middle Ages, it seemed to resemble, at least in the Christian world, it resembled um, anti-Judaism, and then anti-Semitism was in like basically manufactured out of nothing by like sort of like the pseudoscience, this pseudoscience, race science. So I think that's where the understanding of partially where the understanding of the virus analogy comes from. But I mean, you make a good point in that at least a modern version of anti-Semitism is also constructed to like benefit really a certain group of people back in the day, and then other people took it and mutated it to their own needs, like Hitler or whatever the KKK or insert anti-Semitic group here. But
yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's important to keep both analogies in mind, in my opinion.
yeah. I think it's important to understand the kind of like the root of anti-Semitism, how and where it came about, which is why we kind of go back. And if we had much longer, we would go back to like what were those original conspiracy theories that were created. And they were actually created like literally that Jews were the cause of virus, right? Like Jews were the cause of the black and bubonic plagues, right? And that we were the cause of dirtiness, right? Like that's the literal cause. But I think you got to it in the second part, right? Like that then the function of it gets changed, right? And the insert issue here for Jews to be blamed for is the piece that sort of then we can then say it's a machine, because stick in different function into machine of anti-Semitism to blame Jews for X outcome. Thanks, Elisa. Helene.
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 And what I would want to say is it seems to me that what you're moving toward is you're moving toward a sensibility and a consciousness that makes alliance politics possible. And that strikes me as important not only to combat anti-Semitism and to protect Jews and to combat white supremacy, but also, quite frankly, to preserve democracy, which is, sort of, an umbrella goal that I think we all need to be invested in, and that historically is also what the conditions under which Jews thrive.
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. That's a big part of why I wanted to have this conversation today, and why I think Jews need to be talking about this really, really like actively in a really active way. Patricia and then Shmuel, and then I want to kind of dive in further into that. Helene.
First of all, this is a really fascinating session, so thank you so much for facilitating it. Where it's hard for me to make the leap, and someone else mentioned maybe specifically of where we are today, especially since October 7th and everything that's happened in the protests and the university stuff, is making the leap that it's not a unique form of oppression, but that it's linked to other kinds of oppressions as well. It's hard for me to see that connection, which might just be colored by what we're living through today. But maybe you could help make that connection a bit clearer.
It's not that it's distinct. So I just want to say it's distinct in that it has its own features and its own functions, and the way that it operates is different, right? It's targeted at a different group of people, right? It's its own thing, and it has to be identified, named, and called out as anti-Semitism uniquely. But that doesn't mean that it is, I'm going to use a word and it might not feel good, but I don't know a better word and I need to find a better word. I'm trying to think of it. What I don't want us to do is get into what we often talk about in like progressive spaces is oppression Olympics of like what's worse at any given time, right? Is this thing worse than that thing, right? What's the worst thing? They're all bad. They're all bad, right? And so what I don't want us to get into is saying, this is the one thing we really need to be focusing on right now. This is the thing that I, as a Jewish person, I can really only focus on this, and I can only fight this in a vacuum. But rather, how can I understand this thing? How can I teach about this thing to make sure that people in my community that are not Jewish also understand why this is important to me and why they need to be invested in this with me, right? And how do I help them understand the distinct and unique nature of anti-Semitism, but also how it's tied to white supremacy, and also how it's tied to other forms of oppression? And if I don't have that understanding, it's time for me to do that learning. Because historically, again, right, like Jews have been used as this sort of like wedge, right? Like even when we were not responsible by and large for the transatlantic slave trade, there are conspiracy theories that Jews were behind, American Jews, right? Not a large enough population were behind the transatlantic slave trade, right? We were not developing that, but there's conspiracy theories that have led to division in progressive democracy communities that have, again, ripped us apart. When it's used as a fear and division marker, we have to examine that. And that's what I'm asking us to do.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Shmuel, and then Deb, I see your thing in the chat and I want to address it.
I want to wake you up a little bit, so I ask, do we carry some blame for anti-Semitism as Jews? We are so successful in so many societies, beginning with Joseph in Egypt, and Hollywood, and literature, and Germany.
I would say probably not. No, I don't think we're to blame for anti-Semitism. I think we can't take that on. That's not our us being some Jews being successful is wonderful, and we also know that poverty and challenge exists in our community. We know that Jews in our community experience racism, they experience transphobia, they experience all kinds of other forms of oppression. I hear what you're saying. I think that there is a very specific depiction of Jews in a lot of American media. And there has been for some time that feeds those conspiracy theories that we have in anti-Semitism, right? And I think we, as people who value and think a lot about education, listen, some of y'all have been here for 25 hours learning. When I tell my friends about this holiday, they're like, you do what? It's a little bonkers, but it's because as people of diaspora, as people that have been wandering, the thing that has been constant is our education. And so that's what we do, right? But I think I hear what you're saying, Shmuel, and I think I hear you. And no, I don't think anyone who is oppressed or anyone who has ever been, uh, targeted with any kind of discrimination is to blame for that discrimination. But thank you for waking me up. You keep me on my toes, buddy. I appreciate it. I've got a couple questions in the chat that I want to get to. So yes, thank you so much, Brian. You dropped in the chat. I appreciate it. Rabbi Brian dropped in the chat the Dismantling Anti-Semitism guide from Ben the Ark, which is where a lot of this source material comes from. This is a combination of work that they've been doing that I've been doing now for about 10 years. Deb, to your question, about if the machine metaphor provides new insights about how anti-Semitism might be addressed, yes, and we're going to get there, hopefully briefly. Rob, so yeah, I gave a brief introduction at the beginning and gave a very, very overview definition from Project Nexus, which I'll put again in the chat. I know that there are things being debated at a federal level. I'm not here today to get into that discussion because I don't want to, bluntly. This is the definition that I like to use that I think is pretty basic, that I'm using for the purpose of this session. And yes, Adam, thanks for this book. That's a good one that I'm gonna have to take a look at. Okay. So, the question that I put in the descriptor for this session that we have for the last few minutes here, that sort of gets Deb to your point about like it still feels impossible to fight anti-Semitism, right? Is this question, and Eliza, you kind of are getting at this with your comments in the chat as well about cooperating with broad progressive social movements where it feels sticky. And this is why I want to talk about this right now, is how do we challenge and address anti-Semitism without giving up on community and staying in collaboration and coalition with broader social justice movements at a moment when it feels hard sometimes. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's been like super easy since October 7th to like maintain deep progressive bonds. Because there have been real tension points and real breaking points. And one of the things that I think we need to do is really both and moment. One of the characteristics of white supremacy culture is that it makes us choose either or. You either are Jewish or you care about social justice movements. You either care about Israel or you care about Palestinians, right? You either want to fight for this or that. And when we choose a different way if we choose to counteract white supremacy culture, we say, actually, we're gonna do both. We're gonna lean into discomfort and we're gonna say, how do we talk about anti-Semitism with our communities, with our progressive social justice allies, and how do we keep doing this work even when it feels really, really hard? Right? How many of you, and you don't have to get into details, but like you can either emoji or like wave your hand or whatever, have had in the past year and a half, almost 2 years, a sticky situation come up where you have either encountered, seen, heard, or felt anti-Semitism from a progressive ally, or seen it or heard it or felt it? I'm seeing so many in the chat. I'm seeing some nods, right? a little wave, right? How many of you felt prepared to engage with that conversation with that person? A couple. How many of you have felt like, yeah, too afraid? Somewhat. I don't always know what to say. Yeah. What feels hard? I'm curious for folks who have felt afraid or like they don't know what to say, or what has felt like the obstacle? Especially if you haven't spoken yet. Oh, Maria, yay.
I think the biggest obstacle for me has been to separate my racial identity from my Jewish identity. But also, one of the things that Yavila McCoy always says when we are together in sisterhood is that you have to call it out. So it then becomes, how do I call it out and allow for the other side to see that while they might not think that they're anti-Semitic, while they might not think that they're being anti-Jewish, what they have done or what they're saying can be perceived as such. So that's kind of my, the dichotomy that I live with in those moments is, how do you call someone out gracefully and begin a dialogue and discussion, even though you know that what's going to come back at you is like this, like, that's kind of where I sit.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Maria. Thank you. I think it's like, again, these dimensionalities, pun intended, for the Yavila call out. Yavila McCoy Dimensions Educational Consulting, if you haven't checked her out yet. The dimensionalities of our identities that we bring in. But I do think, and I think one of the things that you have to, and I saw someone talking about bodily harm, you have to do a risk assessment. But I think one of the things about this is, if we want to stay in community, if we want to fight for democracy, which Helene mentioned is like one of the places that Jews have historically thrived is under democracy, right? If we want to continue to see a democracy, I'm seeing the chat going a little bit off the rails, and we're not going to do an anti-Zionism conversation right now. So I'm going to ask it, we're gonna step away from the anti-Zionism conversation because we're explicitly not doing that. So here's what we're going to do. Everyone, hands off the keyboard. If you've got your hands on the keyboard, take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. I know that those lines get blurry, and I understand that those lines get blurry. And what we're going to talk about today is how we stay in progressive American Jewish communities when things get sticky around anti-Semitism, when we as Jews experience anti-Semitism, see or feel anti-Semitism. Cool? Thank you. Appreciate you. It's hard to do this online in an hour. If we were in person, we'd be like creating some norms and doing some things. Go ahead, Adam.
I'm gonna try something that's not gonna solve anything, but maybe will help.
Great. Perfect.
For me, it's fundamental. We just need to be able to try to see each other as human beings and be in relationship with each other, and ask who we come from and who comes from us, and know each other and know the names of our relatives, and start there so that we can begin to have thick conversations where it's not just rooted in our preconceived beliefs and ideas and feelings that we all come to these conversations with, for good or for bad.
Yes, thank you, Adam. Rabbi Brian, please.
I mean, there's so much to say about what gets sticky, and I'm trying to figure out where to zero in on. But I think what I want to zero in on, just because we haven't really talked about it yet, is like, I remember those moments where I felt like I was living in two different social media worlds, where, right, my entire Jewish world, like, this is most real, I think, for me, especially when the Texas rabbi was held hostage, right? Like, my entire Jewish social media was talking about that. And like, maybe a non-Jewish friend had like kind of heard about it, maybe, right? And like, that initial instinct of like, how isn't everyone talking about it? How doesn't everybody know about this? But then like the humility to step back and say like, well, wait, I'm sure some racist nonsense has happened
Yeah.
that I didn't know about because that's not, the world that I'm constantly obsessing about, hyper focusing on, right? Well, I mean, sometimes it is, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been feeling that way lately too, Brian, right? Like with these two young people that were gunned down in DC, I was feeling like, why is this not like, why am I not getting inundated with text messages and phone calls? And then I was with friends the other day and I was like, talking to them about it. And they were like, I did not hear anything about that. Right? Because I'm also like of a generation that doesn't read the newspaper. Right. Like, so while it was in the Globe and the Times, like they're not picking up the newspaper to read it. And if it's not coming across their algorithm, they're not going to see it. So I'm hyper fixating, right? And so while I then feel isolated and targeted, I have to check myself. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to walk away, but I do feel isolated. So what I did in that moment is I turned to other progressive Jews and I said, damn, I'm feeling this kind of way. How, can we talk about this so that I can re-engage and feel fully re-engaged back into Jewish community and back into progressive community that's not Jewish, and also then talk to my progressive non-Jewish friends about this thing that's happening that's really impacting me. RJ, welcome.
So, one of the things that I've been having trouble with in all of this, and let me know if this is taking us too far off track, is less anti-Zionist progressives, but pro-Zionist non-Jews and conservatives, and people that are basically using anti-Semitism as a shield for their own Islamophobia
Yeah.
and their own hate and their own wanting ethno states or supporting their doomsday cult. And these people that are supporting the state of Israel, but not out of anything that I would confuse for a love of the Jewish people.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we
I think
that?
that's actually right here at this wedge issue, right? Like, so this is where we see anti-Semitism again gets used as this wedge issue where Jews are kind of put in this like, and we were just 2 sessions ago, Dan Judson was teaching about the origins of American Zionism and was like a session all about Christian Zionists. And it was Brian and I were like chatting on the side, like, oh my God, this is wild. And it was really a reminder that we have to be, and that's why the machine metaphor is clear that anti-Semitism shows up in every ideological space. And so the reason that RJ, I'll just tell you that I talk about anti-Semitism in progressive spaces is that's who I speak to. That's who I'm in relationship with. I'm not in relationship with Christian nationalist Zionists. Like that's not people I move or can move or care to move because they kind of want me to die. But like my friends who I organize with around immigration and around racial justice in my community are people I can move and talk to and who care about my well-being and the well-being of Jewish people, right? So that's where like I focus. But I think what you're calling out is this like really important reminder that like we have to be clear about who are our friends and who are our allies in this work forward and who are using us in different ways. And I think that that's true across political ideological spectrum, right? Like we have to be really clear about when we are being utilized and when we are not, and when we are, and how to be. And this goes back to what Adam said, and the thing that we really talk about at Avodah is deep, deep relationship and leading from relationship and leading from a place of humanity. And we take a wide tent approach. And that's not easy because it means we have Zionists and anti-Zionists in the same community. And you can imagine that gets spicy. But what it does mean is that we have to focus on humanity. And we put relationships at the center, which is again counter to white supremacy, because white supremacy, it tells us we have to do stuff, we have to create, and we have to manufacture, and we have to be the machine, not the anti-Semitism machine, but just a machine, right? So rather than doing that, how do we lead from relationship and from our hearts? And how do I see you as a human being? And if we as Jews can't even get together in a room and talk about seeing each other as human beings as a first step, we're not going to be able to do that with our allies outside of it. Helene.
So I think it's really, really important, your question about the how.
Yeah.
But I want to say that it's equally important to ask the question why. Why do this work? And at least for me, the why then, the why makes the really difficult, work of the how easier. And for me, a lot of it has to do with, what I consider Jewish values. That, that that if I don't want to be complicit, I don't want to be complicit with white supremacy. I don't want to be complicit with homophobia and transphobia. I don't want to be complicit with misogyny. And so, quite frankly, and so doing this work, I mean, I certainly doing this work is in some ways I have to do it to maintain my Jewish soul, and so that I can look at myself in the mirror and feel that I, have committed myself to Jewish values. And so that if we think about it in that way, that we're not, it's our relationship to ourselves as well as relationship to progress, to our progressive, hopefully allies, but the people that we want to be allies to. Even when some of those folks are not being a good ally to me, to be a bad ally is to, go against everything that, I've devoted my life and work to. And that
Yeah.
just helps me sustain this work.
Thank you. I saw a couple hands, but then they went away. Where'd you go? I think it was Puck, maybe. Maybe you disappeared. Okay. Yeah. I want to come back, thank you, Helene, to this question again. Have you been able, can you name times and ways that you've been able to challenge and address anti-Semitism without giving up on community and staying in collaboration? Like, have you had those moments of success before? Have you been able to do that? Susie, tell us about it. And then, oh, Puck, you're back. Puck is back. Okay. Susie, tell us about it.
So this is like, it's a really weird example, but I actually think it was really important for me. So I was in it was mostly social setting, and someone made, it was Passover, and I was cooking, and they made a comment, like, and made it several times, that I was that I like what was I preparing burnt offerings, like sacrifices. And I kind of like I like lost it internally, but I like really challenged them, because I was like, this is like blood libel. Like, I can't believe you're like
Yeah.
literally making a blood libel comment to me, right? Like as I'm preparing for, and these are like all non-Jews. So it turns out that this guy was not trying to make a blood libel comment. He was making a really bad joke that his mother used to make. And what I was able to do was like to hold my inner like panic long enough to be curious about what the hell he meant. And in the process, I taught him what blood libel was and talked about how that's really an inappropriate thing to ever say to a Jew around Passover. And we were able to enter into this really deep conversation. And I know this isn't like like you're probably going for like social movement questions, but like I it was like a really great reminder to me to like not go off the deep end, um, and to try to remain curious about and in the process, I was able to like I think teach him something, um, and um, and for him to recognize that what he said was anti-Semitic, um, and um, and that he needed to do a better job of being aware of anti-Semitism and to be an ally, and that felt good, and just that moment of curiosity, um,
Yeah.
and because I could have very easily just like really lost it in this moment, like I wasn't in a rabbinic setting, like I could have just like really and like really broken ties, you know.
Yeah.
But I was glad I was able to like ask the question.
I think focusing on tropes is often a really important one because I think a lot of people do not know about anti-Semitic tropes. Like they just don't know because they're so insidious and like, right, they're so like woven in and they're so and even just making sure you're clear on them yourself, right? Like what are the anti-Semitic tropes? Where do they come from? What are their origins? Right? Like you're saying, Sharon. Um, it's interesting the number of times that I do the teaching and I'll do teaching about like what are some of the most common ones and where do they come from. Spoiler alert, they almost all go back to that Elders of Zion document, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Almost all of them go back to that.
Well, they're older, but Elders Design was a nice collection of many of
They
them.
like pulled
They
them and that's where
pulled them all in.
that was how it essentially got disseminated globally.
Yeah.
So right, like going back to tropes also allows people to feel a little bit less like they are somehow the problem and that they've and that they're somehow doing something wrong, but more so like the same way as like we've all inherited racist tropes, we've all inherited these terrible things that have just been infused in our society. You can be like, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to do some teaching for you. Cliff, was that a hand? I think I saw.
Actually, yes. It was interesting. Um, I was scheduled to speak at a interfaith program um right after October 7th. And I wasn't really, I had just been asked to do it because somebody else had been sick. And I had accepted that. But what I found fascinating was at this interfaith program, it was an interfaith group of um Mormons and Muslims. And there were about 300 people. Probably 150 were Mormons and 140 were Muslim and maybe 5 or 10 Jews, which is about right. Um, and the other two speakers were very well regarded. I'm just Joe Jew in the pew, and but what had happened was I was really supposed to have been there just to explain my faith. And I look at Judaism as being
Yeah.
um, an experiential faith. I mean, it's not a dogmatic one. And so I shared that. And the interesting thing was in developing that, um, and even the Q&A, people really didn't know what Judaism was. And they afterwards, and the other two speakers, one was the imam in the area, and
Yeah.
the other was somebody who'd written 4 books on Mormonism.
Oh, wow.
And believe me, I'm not educated, can't speak Hebrew, none of that stuff. But afterwards, the people from the Mormon group said they basically said that they learned more from me that evening than from anybody else. They said as far as they were concerned, I was the better speaker. I don't know about that, but And I have not kept up that because obviously the circumstances, but I will reinitiate that.
Yeah. And I
So,
think what you're naming, Cliff, is also showing up, right?
mhm.
It can feel hard to show up sometimes, especially now it can feel hard to show up, and continuing to show up, and continuing to do exactly what you did, and just being present and sharing is crucial in this moment.
And I agree with what you're saying, and I think it's hard for people to hate people who are in love with God, who appreciate God in their life.
Yeah.
And if we could express that more,
Yeah.
because most of us, I mean, myself included,
Yeah.
from years ago, we don't really have that relationship.
Yeah.
And we go to synagogue,
Right.
but this was
Yeah.
was more so.
Yeah. Thank you, Cliff.
Yeah.
So I have just one last set of recommendations, and then I'm out of time. Thank you so much, all of you, for this beautiful, rich conversation. I hope you got a little bit of something out of it. I want to give you just 5 steps for if you're in community with someone and you feel like you've just encountered that trope, that moment. I don't recommend doing this online. I do not recommend it online. Don't get into conversations about anti-Semitism online. Do not do it. Saying it one more time. Don't do it on the internet. But if you do it in person, here are my 5 steps. First is to take a deep breath. The second is to stay curious and ask questions like Rabbi Jacobson modeled for us in her example. The third is to say, can I have it? Would you give me a second to explain why that's problematic or why that's actually a harmful trope? 4 is then offer information. And then 5 is to say thank you and offer further resources. I know that that sounds really, really basic, but when you're activated, when your nervous system is activated, it's hard to remember those. So if you need to put it in your wallet, put it in a note on your phone, whatever, for when you encounter these things, go ahead. Because the bottom line is anti-Semitism is unique and distinct, and it is connected deeply with all other forms of oppression in this country. And it is part of our work to not allow anti-Semitism become a stumbling block and to become a wedge to prevent us from continuing to engage in the crucial work of racial justice, in the crucial work of fighting transphobia, in the crucial work of preserving democracy, in the crucial work of protecting our immigrant neighbors, right? And all the other things that I didn't mention. Thank you so much. I think you got 1 hour left to study, and then you've been doing this for 24 hours. Yeah, mom, there's been a request for a middle finger again from the
We're
chat.
cool.
She said no, she won't do it again. Maybe my dad will.
Emilia, that was wonderful. And
Thank you
it's
so
wonderful
much.
to partner with Avodah. Come back next year. Bring your friends.